Hi, I'm Jerry Gitnick. My middle name is Martin, but my real name is not Jerry, it's Gerald with a G. And I was born here in Omaha, Nebraska on November 27th, 1931, which makes me 72 about now, shortly to be 73. My mother's name was Anne Trediak Gitnick. She came here in 1920 with her mother, Clara Rudd Trediak, with her brother, Is Trediak. My mother was about 12 years old when she came here, couldn't speak a word of English, nor could my uncle Is. They went to Lothrop, no, I'm sorry, they went to a school on 24th and Kellum School, and they immediately were immersed in today's educational vernacular. They were immersed in English and fortunately learned English rapidly. Soon thereafter, they went to work. My mother went to work in the basement of the Brandeis store at a very young age, I'm sure an illegal age even then, in order to support and help support her mother and her brother. Her father had come earlier from Russia and had purchased a home next to his brother at 2043 North 20th Street here in Omaha. And after about 2 years, my mother's father, my grandfather, saw fit to leave his family and move to San Diego alone. He had found someone else to be with in the interval of time after having left Russia and wanted a new life start. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years later, never really knowing his children, and we know nothing more about his life. My father, Nathan Gitnick, came here at about the same time as my mother, also from Russia, with his parents, Ida and Gershon Gitnick, his sister Anne, his brother Edwin, and another brother who died quite young, whose name I do not recall. And they lived on 24th and Ohio Streets. My paternal grandfather died very young. Matter of fact, he died on my 6th birthday because he was supposed to come to our house for the party, and when he didn't show up, my mother and I walked from our home at 20th and Burdett to 24th and Ohio, and I remember walking in and hearing the shrieking and the crying and seeing my grandfather lying on the couch. In those days, Jewish funerals took place in homes. And so the next day, I'm going back, I remember him laying on a wooden plank in the living room. Contrary to custom, his face was still uncovered, and I have never forgotten that, although he was in a shroud and a tallis. My maternal grandmother, Clara Trediak, with whom we lived for many, many years, lived into her either late 80s or early 90s. She was the strongest woman I think I've ever known. all of 75 pounds of her. But there was nothing too hard for her to do in terms of work. And she was a very dominant, difficult personality. And she certainly ran the family. She and my dad did not get along. We lived with her all the years I can remember until I was about 12 years old. Originally, my parents were married quite young, but I don't know exactly their ages, although I think around in the early 20s of their lives. I originally lived in an apartment on Florence Boulevard, north of Willis Avenue on the west side of the street, across from the Gus family, and next door to Louis and Harry B. Cohn's family. And I remember it was a 2-story building. We were on the upstairs apartment. And then things got even rougher. That was in the years of the terrible depression of the 30s. And we moved in with my grandmother. I must tell you that I always thought the house my grandmother had was a big house. It was on a double lot on 20th Street. In those days, my brother was still not born because he's 7 years younger than I am. And I remember we had a couch in the dining room, and that was where I slept. I had occasion with my brother to go to that house on 20th Street 10 or 12 years ago, because we had gone to the cemetery to see some grave sites of my grandmother and my uncle, my great uncle, and my great aunt, and other names, and my dad. And we decided to drive down 20th Street from 42nd and Brown. So we came to this house surrounded by nothing but empty lots, all of which had been occupied by 2-story homes or 1-story homes in the early years. There was not one left except for our house. And we walked up and there was a red condemned sign on the front door. And the house just didn't look the way I remembered it. And I said, Gary, let's not go in, it's dangerous. He said, no, I want to see it. So my brother went around to the side of the house on the south side and found a door that he either forced opened or was opened, I don't remember. And he hollered for me, and I came around, and we both walked into this tiny, tiny little house. It's true it was a 2-story house, but it was tiny. And what I thought was big just wasn't. And I walked around the yard. I used to work for my great uncle, who had a thing called Treaty X Omaha Jobbing Company on 15th in Chicago. And I used to walk from their home. There was a nursery someplace in that area, 15th and Capitol or 15th and Davenport or in there. And I used to walk by it. And they used to have a bin where they would throw out trees that they thought were either unsaleable or out of season. And on one occasion, well, first of all, I used to go, my job at the store during the summers was to take the bank deposit to the old Omaha National Bank building. And so I used to walk by this nursery twice a day, at least twice a day. And I began to know people on this route to the bank and back. And one of the people I got to know was person in this nursery who turned out to be the owner, whose name I don't remember. I asked him on one occasion if I could have something out of the bin, and he said certainly, and he went over with me and he picked out a tree, and I didn't know what kind of a tree it was. But I took it home and I planted it in the backyard of this double lot. And it grew, and then over that summer and over succeeding summers, I got a plum tree and an apple tree. I got rhubarb, roses, and a lilac bush. So here we are, 50 years later, or whatever it was, and I walk through this yard, and my cherry tree is still there, my plum tree is still there, the rhubarb is still there, the rose hedge has grown into a massive, massive rose hedge, and the lilac tree, which was next door to the Himmelstein's house, is 10 feet tall and about 10 feet wide over those years. And the yard was still the yard, as I remembered it, but the house was a bitter disappointment. So anyhow, going back a ways, I went to Lake School all the years that I was in elementary school, and I skipped, I happened to have flunked kindergarten because I had all the childhood diseases that one year, and I was out most of the year. But I made up for it, and I skipped part of the third grade, as I recall, all of the fifth and all of the seventh grade. So when I graduated from Lake School, I was 12 years old. That's when I went into Central High School. Central High School was not a happy experience for me because I was so damn young. I couldn't relate, but I did well in school. And I got out of high school when I was just about, it seems to me I was not quite 16, but I'm not sure. And in the meantime, when I was 12, my folks had managed to put together a huge sum of $500 and had bought a grocery store. I should go back and tell you that from the day that my mother and father married, my father was sick. And his life was saved by a Dr. Rubnitz. He had kidney problems. In those days, that was a death sentence, but the doctors managed to save his life, but he was a weakened physical specimen all those years. Although he worked from time to time. Early on, he'd been in the old Omaha City Market selling fruits and vegetables with Sam Cutler and Louis Saporan, some other names whose name I can't recall, but I can't even see their faces, but their names are gone. And then he gave that up and he went to work for Watson Brothers, which was a transportation company. And he drove a truck when he could in the city. But his health condition continued to deteriorate and he couldn't do that anymore. So they had put together this magnificent sum of $500 and they bought a grocery store at 30th and Pinckney from a man named Reuben Shapiro. And it was a busy store. It was open Sundays, closed Saturdays. We opened at 7 in the morning, we closed at 9 o'clock at night. And Sunday was a busy day and Friday was a busy day. the other days were nothing, but you made a living. You struggled and you made a living, and they made enough of a living so that they were able to help me through college. I had won a scholarship to the University of Nebraska, but my folks couldn't have, it was only a partial scholarship. My folks, I had learned to be a butcher by then, although we had a butcher working for us in the store all the years, but he left at 6 o'clock at night, and he would not work Sundays. But he would come in on Saturday morning and cut up all the meat for the display case. And I had learned the ability to cut meat, so that was what I did after school and on weekends, on Sundays. And my mom was a terrific person, a very nurturing person, loved people. And it was because of her efforts, and her efforts virtually alone, that we were able to live. The store prospered, and I couldn't go to the University of Nebraska, but I gained admission to Creighton University because it was cheaper for my parents, because I could live at home and work in the store. Had I gone to Lincoln to the university, I would have had to pay rent, and who knows about a job in those years. And they would have had to hire somebody for the store, which they could ill afford. So I went to Creighton and got a degree in business administration, and then entered their law school. In 1954, when I was 22 years old, I graduated from law school. And during that whole period of time, things got better financially for us because of the store, although my dad's health continued to go down, 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 not only physically but emotionally. And there were long bouts in the hospital, and how we managed to run the store, because in those days you had to go down to the city market to get fruits and vegetables. My mother had learned to drive. We bought a small panel pickup truck, and my dad would, on the days that he could, would go with her, but my mother would go and buy fruits and vegetables and from the open market, and then whatever heavier commodities. In those days, the commission merchants, like Philly Saporin and Louis Saporin and Sam Cutler and others, had trucks that they would bring the merchandise out to the store if you bought it from them. So we were able to exist. And then going back again, when I was about 14 or 15, is when we bought this panel truck, and I didn't know how to drive. And so my dad, on a Sunday afternoon, when we were not busy, said, "Let's go for a ride. I'll teach you how to drive." And so we drove down, and we were near the projects on 20th and Clark, or thereabouts. And I was going south on 20th Street, and my dad said, we were at Paul Street, 20th and Paul. My dad said, "Make a right turn." And I began to turn the wheel, and I froze, and I went over the curb and up this incline and into a tree. That was my first lesson in driving and how not to drive. And I was freaked, you know. But he made me get back in the car. which only goes to prove if you fall off a horse, get back on the horse. And if you fail at something, get back and try again. And I learned to drive, and then I would go on the market. Even at those tender years, I'd get up at 5 in the morning, because you had to get there early to get a good selection of things. And I had to be back at the store at 30th and Pinckney by 7. So anyhow, that's how the day, and then I would stay at the store. By that time, I was in high school, and I would stay at the store till 8 o'clock, and I'd catch the bus to go to school. I don't remember what time high school started in those days, but I remember I had a late admission concept at Central. I would miss the homeroom, I know that, but I think I made the first period class whenever it started, and I don't remember that. At any rate, that's the way it went. And I worked in the store from the time my folks bought it until, frankly, until I married when I was 35 years old, which was in 1967. See, I still remember that. And I went into the practice of law initially right out of law school with a lawyer by the name of Theodore L. Richling and Clayton Shrout in the old City National Bank building on 16th and Harney. And I was there for all of 9 months, scratching out nothing virtually as far as the living. And then I got a call from a man by the name of Irving Epstein, who became a good friend because he'd gotten to know me, and he was leaving the office he was then with to go to the office of the city attorney. And he was looking for a replacement for the office. The office then was composed of Irvin C. Levine and Donald Brodke. Donald Brodke went on to become a judge and ultimately became a judge of the Nebraska Supreme Court and served brilliantly for years on that court. Irv Levine was a difficult person in his relationships with lawyers, but a great lawyer who never gave in for a client. Irv Levine did not know the word compromise. It was all or nothing, and sometimes it was nothing, but most of the times it was all, and he was not liked. And we were together for many, many years. I think he suffered a stroke. Let's see, we got married in '67, and Sarah Ann and I, my wife, built a home at 122nd and Farnham. And a client of mine was digging the basement on a Saturday when a client of ours, Eli Zalkin by name, knowing that I would probably be at the office, came down to the office. No, I'm sorry. Came out to the house site because Eli's son-in-law, Eddie Belgrade, my good friend, was helping me as a general contractor build a house. And Eli knew that a home was being excavated that day by a client of mine, Virgil Anderson, who now is a big, big demolition contractor in the Midwest area, to tell me that Irv Levine had suffered a massive stroke and might not make it. So I left the building site immediately and we went to the hospital. but to the credit of medicine, or maybe to its detriment, he survived, but he was never the same and became an extremely difficult man to be with, and couldn't practice law and was frustrated, tried to do things that he shouldn't have done, and it was a very bad period of time. And my wife's grandfather, J. Harry Kulikovsky, kept on urging me to leave. He didn't like it, frankly. He was a very strong individual, and he didn't like the reputation that Irvin Levine had even in the earlier years after our marriage. And he had wanted me to leave there then, and I just wouldn't do it. But when things got really tough with Irvin, I knew I had to do something. It was just impossible to be with him, and it was a sad thing because he couldn't function. We would cover for him in every way we could, and it wouldn't work. He would resent it. He just wasn't himself. And I left, and I opened an office in the Continental Building at 19th and Douglas. And I was able to retain a very good clientele that I had built over the years, and frankly, some of whom had been Irvin's clients, but who saw what was taking place and knew they either had to go with me or to some other firm, and most of them, thankfully, elected to stay with me. Shortly thereafter, I was blessed when I ran into Steve Lustgarten, who was then in a partnership with his brother Al, and Steve was looking to go out on his own. Steve specialized in domestic relations law, divorce, child custody matters, while I did mostly corporate, estate, business law type matters. So we sort of complemented each other's expertise. And I must tell you, I thought of myself as being a good lawyer, and I knew Steve to be a good lawyer, and we did well together. We never had, in all of the years that we were together, Steve and I, there was not one misunderstanding, one harsh word. It's almost impossible to believe two lawyers getting along that well. We are still friends to this day, and I intend seeing him this weekend, as I do every time I come here to Omaha. Going back again, in 1954, the store had done well for my parents, and my mother wanted, well, let's see, by 1954, we had moved from 20th and Burdett. We'd bought a house across the street from the store on the corner at 30th and Pinckney. And we'd lived there for several years. My grandmother had moved in with us. And then in 1954, my mother wanted to build a new home. And we bought a lot, or they bought a lot, at 58th and Seward. And Davy Bialak, who was a great builder, more than a builder, that's unfair, he was an artisan, built this home for my mom, and it was a very nice house, and we lived there until my father died, and then the memories of my father from my mother were very difficult, and I was still living there when my father died. And about 2 years later, God, I hope I'm right on these things, because I can't recall specifics. About 2 years later, I met my wife, who had come to Omaha to visit her grandparents, Sadie and J. Harry Kulikovsky, and to visit her cousins, Barbara Nog Frankel and her husband, Dean Frankel. Dean, early on, had been my good friend from high school through college. We both went to Creighton together. We were friends all those years. So it was really a coincidence that I should know them, and they should know me, and I think that Saran and I ought to be together. From the day I met Saran until the day we were married, it was a total of 10 weeks. And people said it would never last. Well, now it's almost, we're in our 38th year, and we've proved them wrong. We've had a good marriage and a great, at least from my perspective, a great life. We've had health problems, but everybody has that. We were blessed. We built a home the year after we were married at 122nd and Farnham Street. Really nice house. We raised 2 wonderful children, 2 daughters, a daughter, Nan Marie, who was born November 8th, 1968, and is married to Dan Horton, and they have 2 great children, our grandchildren. My granddaughter, who is 6 years old now, Ashley, and her little sister Nicole, who's 2 years old. And our other daughter, Andrea, who was born September 22nd, 1970, and who's married to Bradley Kuiper. Both Dan Horton and Bradley Kuiper are from Omaha. We are very, Andy has 2 children with Brad. My grandson, Zachary, who is just something really special. And he was born March 11th of 2000, and he's 4 years old, and he's dynamite. He has a little sister, Tara, who is 1 month older than her cousin Nicole. And Tara is a very, very wonderful child. All my grandchildren are special. No other grandfather has special grandchildren like my grandchildren. I'm sure that's absolutely, unquestionably true. And you all know that it's untrue. I want to tell you about Nicole. Nicole has pure white hair, just like you do. And she's dynamite. She won't stop running. She has more energy than everybody put together that I know. I don't know what we're going to do to calm her down, but she is such a good kid. And Nicole was born May 22nd of 2002, and her cousin Tara was born June 22nd, 2002. So we had a busy summer that year, and they've been delights. And we are very lucky because after we left Omaha, we'd been going for years on vacations and short periods of time. First, we used to go to La Jolla, but then in 1977, I became a judge, and La Jolla got to be a little expensive for what I made as a judge. But at any rate, we started going to Scottsdale, Arizona. I had been going to Scottsdale on business. I had a client in Omaha who had two branches, one in Tucson and one in Kingman, Arizona. But I would come to Scottsdale because it was sort of midpoint between the two, and go to each branch once every 3 or 4 months. So I'd gotten to know Scottsdale. Then Serena and I got married, and as I say, we used to go to La Jolla, but then we stopped going there, and we started going instead to Scottsdale. And we really liked it, and we developed a circle of friends there early on, you know, going back 40 years, or almost 40 years. And our periods of time in Scottsdale increased as vacation time increased. And then we finally decided when I retired in 1993 to make Scottsdale our retirement home, although we retained our Omaha home, the one we had built in 1967. But we'd rented places in Scottsdale all those many years. And then we bought a home in Scottsdale in about 1994, I think, or 1995, and it was a nice house, but it became burdensome. I hated the traveling of going back and forth and bringing clothes back and forth and back and forth, and we no longer needed the Omaha house. Both our children had married by then, and one was living in Omaha and one was living in Los Angeles. And we decided to sell the Omaha house, which we did in one day, to Jeff Kirschenbaum. And we then started a search for a bigger house in Scottsdale, and we bought a very nice home that we're still in to this day. And as I sit here, we are doing some remodeling in that house right now, and I'm really worried about what the contractor is doing to me financially and constructive-wise. But at any rate, we were really unusual because a year after we decided to make Scottsdale our permanent residence, our daughter Nan and her husband, who were living in Omaha, decided they wanted to move. Dan was being transferred to Kansas City, Missouri, and they decided if they were going to be transferred and move from Omaha, why not go where it's beautiful and warm and comforting? And so they called one night and asked what we thought of it. And, you know, we pointed out the probable difficulties of job hunting and all of that, and house hunting. But all that was overcome. My wife is a very detailed person, and she went out and through an Omaha friend who had moved to Scottsdale, Ellen Stein Cohn, who was a realtor, found a location and that was acceptable to their children, to our children, and they decided to build a home there and immediately commenced construction and moved into that home directly after it was built and remained there until this year when that couple bought a larger home. Now the great thing about that is my other daughter, Andy, and her husband, Brad, who were then living in Los Angeles, decided they'd had enough of big city life in LA, and they called and said, we'd like to come to Scottsdale. And so we started the whole ballgame all over again with Ellen, looking for a house for them. And we found a home for them, which they love and still are in, about 2 blocks from the home that my daughter Nan and her husband Dan had built. Now the interesting thing is that Nan and Dan have moved from that first house into this larger, nicer home, a block and a half from where Andy and Brad now live. And they all live about 20 minutes from us, which is really ideal. And it's wonderful for us. We go to a Jewish community center, a new Jewish community center facility in Scottsdale, which has a gym facility within it. And because of health reasons, Saran and I have to do exercise, even though we both hate it. And we go to the gym either 4 or 5 times a week. But our grandchildren, originally all 4 of them, were in a Jewish preschool at the Jewish Community Center in Scottsdale. Now my oldest grandchild, Ashley, goes to the public school near their home. So we don't get to see her with the same regularity, but we see the other 3 at least 5 times a week. And sometimes we go out for dinner on the weekend with our families together, or they come over to our house, or we go to their house. So really, we have a family-centered relationship that is independent for each of us, and yet very close and very warm and very loving. And high school, those were unhappy years for me, truthfully. I had no social life in high school because of having to be at the store to help my folks. And my dad's health was really getting worse and worse and worse. And but you know, like anybody else, you have friends in school, although I seldom saw them after school or out of school, because we lived in an area of the community that was not exactly conducive to social relationships. It was directly in the black ghetto, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Jewish kids didn't live in the black ghetto, and it was far removed from where the Jewish families lived. And but I had good friends who became my clients, who are still my friends to this day. I mentioned earlier Dean Frankel, who's having some tough times right now, and his wife. And by tough times, I mean health-wise. And Eddie Belgrade of blessed memory, who was so good and died so young. And little Joe Kirschenbaum, who's still a good friend, and his wife Maxine. And I remember names, but I haven't seen them in years. I remember Marty Nierenberg, and I don't even know if he's alive anymore. And I did have a friend from 20th Street. We've maintained a friendship to this day. His name is Sam Sasula, but that's not the name he uses. He became a ballet dancer of some note. He became a choreographer and did choreography for I think it was a musical name, but I don't remember it specifically. And his name became Sam Damari, D-I-M-A-R-I. He moved in from New York he was with a traveling company for all the years that they were on tours with that and with other musicals. And he moved to California, and he became a official for the Actors Union, whatever it's called. He retired about 4 or 5 years ago, and he moved back to Omaha. And I've seen him twice, I think, since he moved back to Omaha. That's the only really close friend that I can recall from the early years of my childhood in Omaha. Well, that isn't so. Down the street from us, a mother and her son from Lincoln moved. The mother married Judah Wolfson's brother, who taught me my bar mitzvah, Av Torah, but whose first name I don't recall, but he was a very learned man, as was Judah Wolfson. And that friend's name is Maury Bressel. Coincidentally, years later, when we built the home in Omaha, Maury Bressel married Jean Kaplan, and they bought a home about a block from us on 122nd and Farnham. So what goes around comes around. Jean died several years ago, but Maury is still living here in Omaha. I really don't recall. Well, I knew people. The Wietzers, or Weitzers, as one is known and the other is known by the other name, lived on Florence Boulevard near the Nachmans. That's the only names that come to my mind. In high school, I developed strong relationships with teachers, with some teachers. I remember great people. We had a physics teacher by the name of Pop Schmidt, who was sheer terror for me, but who was a great teacher and prompted us all to do our best. But a tough man, tough man. Made demands that were, I don't think it was expected of you in college, but a good teacher. Wanted only the best out of you. I had a great English teacher by the name of Augusta Kibler-Turpin, who was a warm, caring, inspiring, and inspired teacher. I had a great Latin teacher whom I maintained a friendship with even after high school, and whom I visited. She left Omaha and moved to California, and I visited in California. Bernice Engel, who was just something special. And I remember Miss Waymuller, who was the librarian at Central in the 425, I think it was the number. And I had an algebra teacher who I always thought, frankly, was anti-Semitic, but I think she was boy crazy, very honestly. And that was Miss Burns. And I had a real nut of a teacher for social studies by the name of Elizabeth Clark, who was out in space. That's all I can tell you. Should not have been teaching, way beyond her abilities in those years. She was older and barely hanging on. And I had a good history teacher. I think her name was Miss Whitney, I think. And then there, of course, there was the sexiest of them all, We used to sit with her legs crossed on the desk, and sometimes not crossed. What was her name? What was her name? Fortunately for her, I can't remember. Oh, gee, I don't remember much about that. It may come to me as we talk. I want to go back a ways. I want to tell you about my brother Gary. Gary left Omaha also at about 16 and went to the University of Chicago. In those years, there was an early admission program, and Gary had won a scholarship. And Gary's a brilliant person. He's a great doctor. He has a worldwide reputation. He's written or edited some 50 books and 300 articles. His specialty is Crohn's disease and liver diseases. He's a gastroenterologist. He's currently, and has been for many years, head of the Division of Gastric Diseases at UCLA, and proudly was chief of staff of the entire hospital and institution for some years. He's married to Sherna Schrager, who's from Omaha. And they live in Encino, California, and they have 4 children. And they're doing great. We see them with great regularity because my wife's 2 brothers also live in suburbs of Los Angeles, one in Manhattan Beach and one in Santa Monica on the beach. And so we go there and we have, both my wife and I have some medical problems, and while we live in Scottsdale very near the Mayo Clinic, which has an excellent reputation as to its Rochester facility, but is maybe not quite as good as Rochester. In Scottsdale, we live about a mile from the clinic. For any kind of really important medical care, we go to UCLA because of my brother and his ability to direct our needs to specialists that he feels are the best available. My brother's abilities are really substantial. He is known as the doctor to the stars, not because he wants that recognition, but it has come to him to be the physician for many of the influential people in the community, politically, entertainment-wise, educationally involved, things of that sort. And he enjoys a great reputation. Turn it off. Every man who's happily married, I think, thinks his wife is the greatest. But I'm convinced that I have the greatest wife. I told you earlier that Saran and I only knew each other for 10 weeks from the day we met to the day we were married. But if anyone has been an inspiration and a model to our children, to myself, it is Saran. To know her is to know somebody that is unique. She has leadership abilities nurturing abilities that are just not common. In the years we lived in Omaha, she was very much involved in the communal affairs and also in the educational affairs. When our kids were very young, Omaha faced the integration of its schools, and Saran was co-chairman of the integration campaign. We had difficult days because of it, not she and I, but calls concerning her activities, which were not pleasant for her. That is to say, those calls were not pleasant for her. They were insulting, demeaning. They were inappropriate. But she faced that challenge, and integration became a fixture of the Omaha school system, and it worked very well. The interesting thing about life is that I grew up on 20th and Burdett, went to Lake School. Lake School closed, and they built a new school on 22nd and Burdett. Sorry, I can't remember its name, but I worked all my life to leave 20th and Burdett. In the integration process, both of my children are bused from 122nd and Farnham to 22nd and Burdett, 2 blocks from where I grew up. But they got a terrific education while they were in that school for 1 or 2 years, whatever it was. And I think it's important, and I think that integration effort, although it's been disbanded by the court system, taught my children more about relationships and life than most children receive, and I think they've benefited from that. But back to Saran. Saran, who is so warm, she has the most marvelous relationship with our kids and our grandchildren. The trouble is she gives too much of herself, makes too much demands of her body for them. But I can't convince her to do otherwise. And she enjoys it, what can I say? And so do I, frankly, but to a different degree and in a different way. Saran, who has stuck with me through the worst of times and through these good times. We moved from Omaha to Scottsdale, leaving a host of friends here. But coincidentally, we see most of our Omaha friends in Scottsdale or on trips back here even to this day. We're here now, frankly, for the wedding of David Stern, where I will be officiating tomorrow night. And David was a member of my children's carpool, and his parents have been our friends, Skip and I'm sorry, it slipped my memory. All these years. David and I have the same birth date, but as I may have said earlier, for some reason, David is about 31 years of age and I'm 72 years of age. And I don't know how the arithmetic comes to be that way. But at any rate, in Scottsdale, there are a number of Omahans who live there now, either in the wintertime or the year round. Ellen Cohn lives there. Her former husband, Jimmy Cohn, with whom I have lunch on Mondays, lives there. Marlon and Margie Somberg from Omaha, who live about a mile from us, and with whom I have lunch with Marlon every Monday, and we probably go out to dinner with Margie and Marlon once every couple of weeks. Kenny Sachs, who originally is from Council Bluffs and has since passed away, and his wife Velma lived around the corner from where we currently live in Scottsdale. And Velma still lives in that house, and we have dinner with Velma frequently. And while our circle of Omaha friends goes beyond that, memory doesn't serve me at this point to bring up their names. As we think about it in the next few minutes, maybe I can recall. Sue and Dave Myers from Omaha are coming this winter for a month. And we see them when we go to San Diego, where we do go on occasion, because they winter usually in La Jolla, in San Diego. Or I guess they're on Mission Beach, which is a nice area. Gosh, I see so many, and yet I can't. And we've developed a circle from Minneapolis, from Indianapolis, from Texas. So it's not a closed society. And as I say, we go to the JCC all the time, and you get to know people. Whether you really socialize with them is on a different level, because you tend to stay at least in the same area of Phoenix, Scottsdale that you live in. But Phoenix is a big city. It's now the 6th or 7th largest community in the nation, with a population in excess of 6 million people. Although Scottsdale is not that, by any means, that big. Scottsdale is a very nice area. The activities in Scottsdale has everything that Chicago has, or New York has, or Los Angeles has. We have the Scottsdale Center for the Arts, which is great. You know, we have a Scottsdale Symphony Orchestra. We have the Phoenix downtown area, which is going through a regeneration, but has marvelous entertainment and a great symphony. And while we don't do it's a long drive from our house to downtown Phoenix. It's an hour away. And it gets more difficult for me year by year, so we don't do that much night driving at all to Phoenix. But it's not that difficult to go down to downtown Scottsdale, which is 20 minutes away. And we like to be a part of that. And we'd like to go out to dinner. Saran has always believed in all our years of marriage that a kitchen is meant to be a Jewish museum. Although I enjoy cooking and always have, and when we are home, I tend to do the cooking. Not that she can't cook, it's just that when I retired, she decided to retire also. Although between you and I, Saran retired long before I did. Saran has had a difficult health history these last several years, but you'd never know it. Saran had a very difficult heart bypass procedure 4 years ago when 5 of her arteries were completely blocked, and they proceeded to do a bypass. Well, first they put in a stent at UCLA, but the stent didn't last long. And I told her she would have to have the bypasses. And so then they proceeded to do the bypass procedures as soon as they could schedule it. And she had a great doctor, a man from a very Orthodox Jewish doctor from South Africa by the name of Dr. Lax, L-A-X. He honestly believes that a doctor should work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in spite of his orthodoxy, but because of his dedication, he's been married and divorced 3 times and is now in his 4th marriage. But there is no finer person that I know. And as the procedure continued through the 5 bypasses, Saran survived, but that same day, all 5 bypasses occluded, dried up, failed. And they took her back in, and she had a heart attack on the table, and flatlined, died in effect. And they brought in an immediate team to handle attempts, and they were able to revive her. And while the other team proceeded to redo the 5 bypasses. So in the space of that one day, she effectively had 11 major situations. She then went into a coma for 30 days, from which we thought many times she would never come out. And we put in a heart pump in her leg, which is supposed to only last, or be permitted to last, for 14 days. Otherwise, the leg muscle atrophies. Well, she was still in a very serious situation at the end of 2 weeks. And we had to make a decision whether to turn off the heart pump in her leg and take a chance, or to leave it on and probably lose her ability to walk on that leg. And with my brother's help, we'd elected to leave the heart pump continue and give her life if she would come out of the coma, although there would be difficulty with that leg. Well, Saran is so strong and so demanding of herself. If you know my wife, if you see her, you would never know she's had a problem. Because of her activities at the gym and through physical therapy. Oh, I didn't mention that after 30 days, miraculously, she came out of this coma. Although she has no memory at all of any of these events. And remained in the hospital for several weeks after coming out of the coma. And then we went to my brother's, where we stayed for, I think, another 5 or 6 weeks before coming back to Scottsdale, because she needed to be under constant attention at UCLA. And so that was a tough period for her and for all of us. And but to see her today is to see a miracle, because she walks today without a limp. She walks today, does a treadmill, does aerobics, does Pilates. There's no activity, if she wants to be a part of it, that she isn't a part of. She is so involved. The only thing I can't do to get her to do is to wash toilets and clean floors. She says a Jewish wife wasn't meant to do that. I offered to find someone else, a mistress. She doesn't want me to have any part of that either. So in that sense, she's very selfish. I want to go back and tell you about, I've told you how my mother was. Unfortunately, my mother developed Alzheimer's and was a vegetable for so long. Lived at the Blumkin home here where she got marvelous care and love. But it was 12 years of agony for the rest of us. She would not have wanted those 12 years. My mother, I told you, was a very nurturing person. After my dad died, my mother remarried to a really nice man by the name of George. I'm sorry, I can't remember George's last name, but he was a wonderful man, wonderful to my wife, wonderful to my mother, especially my mother, wonderful to our younger, very young children. Unfortunately, George died a year after they were married, but that year was really memorable for all of us. He was perfect for my mom, absolutely perfect. They were two nurturing people. We just didn't know anything but love. He went bowling and died at a bowling alley. And thereafter, my mother was a widow again for many, many years. And then she had known Dave Hahn from Omaha. George was not from Omaha, but he came to Omaha. Dave Hahn was from Omaha. He had a company here called Pioneer Uniform. And Dave has two daughters, Aviva, who's married to Marty Schukert, and his other daughter, who's married to, whose name I don't recall and don't care to recall. He was married to Sherman Brodke. Needless to say, I have less than kind thoughts about her. But Dave was a nice man. He was under the thumb of that daughter, who governed every facet of his life. And if she'd have just given him a little happiness, she'd feel better about herself. My mother was married to Dave for many, many years. And Dave is gone. He's passed away too. He passed away way before my mom. My mom lived to be 96 years old, but as I've indicated, the last 12 years of her life, if the numbers are right, were meaningless. She was in a vegetable state and didn't know us, couldn't speak, couldn't feed herself, couldn't dress herself, lay in a fetal position for years. But I can't say enough about the Blumkin home and its staff, what they did to make things easier for us and for her. I want to talk to you about my uncle, Iz Trediak, my mother's brother. Iz is now about 92 years of age, and he isn't the man he used to be, but in all the years that I've known him, Iz has been a mentor for me. He has been a mensch. A mensch, and God, those of you know what mensch means. I'm not sure that I can define mensch, except to me it means what every human being ought to be. Iz was a leader in this community. He ran a business that was very successful. He went on to re-educate himself. He went to college when he retired, went beyond college, went beyond degree concepts, taught, mentored others, involved himself. His whole retirement years until he began to have memory problems was devoted to others. He's married to his wife Selma all these many years. They've had a great marriage. They had 2 wonderful children. Gail, my cousin Gail, who was just like her father, who's married to Jerry Cole. And he had a son, my uncle Selma had a son, Kenny, who died very young. He had cancer. He died when I think he was 31 years old. And Kenny and his wife lived a block from us. And Kenny was a good kid, had such potential, but didn't have the years to do anything with it. Kenny and his wife had 3 children. One son lives in Kansas City, one son lives in Israel, and his daughter just recently married, and I'm not sure where she lives. But they grew up to be good people, just like their father could have been, was, just like their grandfather. I'll tell you, if you haven't known him, you just can't realize what kind of a human being he is and was. If I could only say I was as good as his, it would be the proudest moment of my life. I can't say that. I just didn't have it in me to be what his is and was. When I was a kid growing up and we lived on 20th, would come over to see his mother, my grandmother, every Sunday, rain or shine, no matter what. And I don't think there was a week. My mother's father left them cold turkey, never sent them money, never did anything for them. My mom worked, worked, but every Sunday I can remember, in those years on 20th Street, well, at least until my folks bought this little grocery store and things got better for us, there wasn't a week that didn't come over and give my grandmother some kind of financial help. He was always there and always good. And a laugh. Perhaps the only thing I really have of his, it's part of me physically, I'm told, is that people say when they hear me laugh, they hear his laugh. And when they hear me talk, I have the same speech patterns as his used to have. And to some degree, Iz and I share the same hairline. But Iz is everything to me. I'm going over to see him after I get through with this session, as a matter of fact, and to see Selma. '76, I practiced law for 22 years, and I was really burned out. When I was with Irvin Levine, Irvin did not want to grow the firm. Our clients grew. But we did not, he did not. He was the senior partner. He did not want to bring in any other people to help us. And he didn't want to be a boss. He told me that. We hired a fellow out of Lincoln and went on to have a brilliant career. And before he came to work, Levine changed his mind and asked me to call him and tell him that he shouldn't make the change. So Irvin and I continued together all those years. Meantime, the law became more technical, clients grew and made more demands. But I also grew in the practice. You come out of law school, you don't know a thing about practicing law. You don't know a thing about working with a client. That isn't the function of law school. The function of law school is to teach you certain basics and to teach you how to find what the law is, to develop a concept of thinking. That's the function of a law school in my day. Today, maybe it's changed. But that idea of not wanting to be a boss endured for me, and it was a sad mistake. When I left Irvin and opened my own practice, my clients had grown substantially. And I was working terrible hours. I was an emotional wreck. I'd come home and, I couldn't relate to my children. But Saran saw me through those problems. But I was working 7 days a week, and I was working till 10 o'clock at night, and it was ridiculous. But coming from the background that I'd come from of never having security, it was important to me, and the reason I probably waited till I was 35 to get married was I wanted some financial stability in my life, and I had attained that when I got married, and certainly had attained it thereafter because of the growth in the law. My thought has left me for the moment. At any rate, by the time 1977 rolled around, I was burned out. I'd already decided I was leaving the practice of law. I'd even told people I was leaving. I certainly had told Steve Buscard. I hadn't set a date, but in my own mind, I had crossed that bridge. My wife's brothers have a very successful business in California, started by their my wife's mother and their mother, called Lakeshore Curriculum Materials, which is among the largest curriculum materials businesses in the United States. And it was my thought that, and their thought, that perhaps I should entertain the idea of joining with them. And Saran and I went out to California and really even looked at homes. And we were getting serious about it. But I didn't feel welcome. There was something in me. I'm not going to tell you that my brothers-in-law were not hospitable or not wanting me to come in. I just didn't feel in my heart of hearts that it was what I wanted to do. And so we decided we'd come back and either, many of my clients, had grown, some were selling out. I would have had an opportunity to buy a business here if I wanted to go into business. And maybe I would go into social work. I frankly liked those relationships. So I was thinking about alternatives, and then something happened. Steve came to me one day and said, you know, if you're interested in a judgeship, one is going to be available. In Nebraska, by that time, we'd gone off this concept of electing judges politically, and it entered into what is known as the Missouri plan for the selection of judges. It's known as the merit plan. Under that procedure, if you're interested, you file an application, you appear before a public body composed of lawyers and lay people and headed by a member of the Supreme Court. And all those who appear before you, before that body, are then considered, and under the statute as it was then worded, the most qualified persons were submitted to the governor for his selection. In our case, 3 names were submitted. Larry Brodke, who was Don Brodke's younger brother. Ben, I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name, and myself. And of the 3 of us, if I were to judge it objectively today, I would tell you that Ben, whose name I can't remember, was the most stable, without any question. He had the temperament, he had the intelligence, he had the dedication. He was a fine person, but he also had a heart condition. In the course of my practice, we had developed a certain relationship with the Chief Justice of the Nebraska Supreme Court, a man by the name of Paul White, for whom we'd done even some work locally. The governor decided that Ben Wall was his name, good man. The governor decided that of the 3 of us, he was not comfortable with any of us. The fact is that the governor, James Exon, was running for re-election, and I think he was then running for election to the Senate. He'd been governor. I don't think he was running for re-election as governor in those days, but I'm not sure. But he was seeking some strength politically. And previously there had been a person on another vacancy whose name had been submitted to the governor, but whom the governor had bypassed. This person was then a high mucky-muck of the Shrine organization in Omaha. And foolishly, this person let it be known that he had received the commitment of the governor to the vacancy to which he had also applied when I had applied, had Ben Wall and Larry Brodke. And although he had been previously determined to be qualified, but had not been selected by the governor, on this occasion, because he foolishly boasted of his probable appointment, word got back to the committee that this so-called wiring had occurred, and the committee did not pass his name out of committee. That's what angered Jim Exon, to say that none of the 3 of us were qualified, and he refused to make the appointment. Under the law, it then passed to the Chief Justice of the Nebraska Supreme Court to select the person he thought best qualified. Well, whether it was because of our previous relationship or because he honestly felt that I was suitable for the position, he ultimately determined that I should be appointed, and I was so appointed. Unfortunately, on that same very day when Paul White called to tell me of his selection, At the very same time, on my other telephone line, my brother was calling me to tell me of the fact that my cousin Kenny Trediak's cancer had spread down his spinal column. There was no hope for his recovery. So I started out in the judgeship not in the happiest of circumstances. And I must tell you, while I was on the bench 16 years, they were not 16 years that I can tell you in hindsight that I enjoyed. I had this concept going in that I really wanted to change things on the bench. I thought I could make a contribution. In those days, the bench was composed of 12 very elderly judges, some who were sick, some who were sick because of alcohol, some who were unwilling to commit the time and effort because of age. And the backlog of cases was just overwhelming. I may be short on memory, but I think I'm accurate in this recollection of fact. Each of the 12 judges had a backlog of over 600 civil cases when I went on the bench. Now that's a tremendous backlog. There was a backlog in terms of trial dates going back 4 years when I went on the bench. And that was the denial of any concept of justice. There's not a person alive who can tell me that they remembered an accident scene or a contract discussion or a dispute of any kind that required judicial intervention that can honestly remember factually what occurred several years ago. We all tend to add or subtract or to color those events. And it was a complete denial of justice. So anyhow, when I went on the bench, I was, I don't even remember how old I was, but I was young. I was born in 31. I went on the bench in 77. The difference is what, 46 years? 46 years. And that's pretty young for a judge, although there have been younger judges. So anyhow, I thought I could change things. The first thing I did is I went to a thing called the National Judicial College, which is located in, of all places, Reno, Nevada. And I took their courses. And I came back imbued with this new philosophy and new methodology and what ought to take place. And I began to incorporate that thinking into what I was doing. But I got to tell you, the law is a slow wonder to see change in its performance. Lawyers resist change, rightly or wrongly. From my perspective, wrongly. But I began to do these new things, and I created a resentment among the legal profession with many people that brought anger into the courtroom. I tried to impose new methods of pushing cases forward and new preparation techniques and pre-trial concepts that, while I thought were great to simplify issues and to bring settlements early, were really resisted by the bar. And the other members of the bench, older than I, and wiser in years certainly, told me that I was creating a problem. And I resisted it. I foolishly didn't listen to my peers. So I went in creating difficulties for myself. But thereafter, these other 11 men passed away, began quickly to leave the bench, and we got a whole new team of younger lawyers in. Some a few years older than I was, some a few years younger than I was, but we were a new team. And as a new team, we wanted to see a new methodology in the courtroom. Most of us. Two of us absolutely resisted. I should tell you that the fellow that had been promised the judgeship that caused Governor Exton to pass the three of us from his appointment was ultimately appointed to the bench on the next occurring vacancy. He was one of the two that resisted any change in the procedure. And there was one other who was, he's still my friend. I talked to him yesterday on the telephone. But he resisted change. That was his nature. And it is still his nature, although now he's 80 years old. But we really did bring a new force to Douglas County. When I left in '93, lawyers were then complaining, because lawyers always complain. Early on, they complained because I was pushing them into the trial when they didn't want to go to trial and making them accept these new procedures. Now, 16 years later, they're complaining because we're pushing them into trial so quickly they haven't had time to prepare. When I left the bench, from the filing of a certificate of readiness for trial to the date of trial was approximately 4 months. That was, that was unique in the nation. I don't have any idea what it is today. I don't care either. But as we went to conferences nationally and locally, we were looked at as a system to hope for, because that was delivery of justice appropriately. That wasn't because of me. That was because of all of us. And we all worked hard to erase that terrible backlog. And we worked hard to keep those dockets current. And we developed a whole different way of doing things. And I want to think that at least some of that has survived. I don't know, though, because I really don't have very much to do with the judicial system at all anymore. And those were my 16 years on the bench. I'm going to tell you that I've been retired since 1993. I had a minor stroke in that year, and I do have some impairment on the right side, and I have some memory loss. But the past 11 years, because this is 2004, have been the most satisfying 11 years. I enjoy each day. I love the sun. I love the heat. I hate the snow. I hate winter. My son-in-laws take my grandchildren up to Flagstaff, Arizona, so they can at least know snow. They want me to go with them. I have turned them down, absolutely. I don't want to see snow. I was in an airplane yesterday coming here. I looked out on the mountains, and they were snow-peaked. And it's a beautiful scene. But I thought to myself, not for me. And here we are in Omaha, and fortunately we're here when there's no snow on the ground. Every day of my existence in Scottsdale is outside. We have a beautiful home in a beautiful area with a beautiful yard. And when we lived in Omaha, I had a nice home and a beautiful yard that I myself landscaped and planted and enjoyed. And when we bought this home that we're in Scottsdale, it had been professionally landscaped. It remains professionally landscaped, and I sort of play with it, but I don't do much else with it except look at it. And I enjoy doing that. And whether it's the heat of the afternoon in the hottest of months, Saran and I enjoy being outside. We have our own swimming pool in our backyard. We enjoy going in there, and whether we go in there clothed or unclothed is none of your business. But I tell you, we do whatever we want to do, and we enjoy it. We eat outside, we read outside, we sit outside, we walk outside, and it's a great lifestyle. I can heartily recommend it to all of you. Now it comes time to end this. I want to talk to Sarai, and I want to talk to my children and my grandchildren. I'm 72 years old, and you got to be practical about life. And the cycle of life is that whether it's tomorrow or 5 years from tomorrow or 10 years from tomorrow, whatever it is, I want you all to know how much I've loved you, and what I've gotten from you has been nothing but love. I am so very proud, Saran, of everything that you've accomplished, your accomplishments here in Omaha, educationally, as president of the Federation, as president of the Community Center, in your committee work, in every endeavor that you've ever worked in. You've given it your all, I know that, and you've reaped rewards beyond measure, and you have my great respect and love. And Dan and Andy, I know at times I've troubled you. I've made demands on you when I was on the bench with regard to behavior that demanded of you a strength of character and a resolve that I shouldn't have made demands on you. You should have enjoyed your teenage years much more than I permitted you to. And I'm sorry about that. You're good kids. I have nothing but love for you and pride in you. You've married well. I respect your husbands. I have good relationships with them. And your children, my grandchildren, oh, what you've given me, you'll never know. I love them. I can't even tell you that I can define love for you. But every time I see you, and I see your children, I wish I could live to be 100, but I don't want to live to be 100. I don't want to have you go through, or Saran go through, what you went through, and we went through, as far as my mother was concerned. I think that that's the bad part of life. You know, life is really wonderful, but only if you have it mentally and hopefully physically, but most importantly mentally. And I hope you will understand my perspectives and respect them. And let me go quietly when I go, always knowing how much I've loved you, because I have and I do. Betty, I thank you for this opportunity. This is the great me when I had hair. I think I was 6 years old, but I'm not sure. This is a picture of my father, his family. To the top left is his father, Gershon Gitnick, and to the top right is I used to call her Itzy Baba, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. I don't remember her first name, unfortunately. They are both buried here in Omaha at 78th and Crown Point. My grandfather died on my 6th birthday. I really do remember my grandfather taking me to Labor Day parades and putting me on his shoulders. Omaha used to have a strong Union Labor Day parade in downtown Omaha. And my grandfather had a hotel at 15th and Cass, and that's how he made his living. to the bottom of this picture on the left-hand side is my Aunt Anne, who lives in Kansas City and is still living, although now she's in a nursing home. In the middle of the picture is my father, Nathan, who passed away at age, I believe, 54. And on the bottom right is his brother Edwin, whose Jewish name was Yitzchak, but whom we called Itzik. And out of that came Itzi, and out of that came Itzi. Looking at a picture of my mother's mother, Clara Rudd Trediak. She weighed nothing. You know, literally, she was so thin and so tiny. She must have been, I'm sure, less than 5 feet tall. And if she weighed 75 pounds, that was her top weight. But nothing was too much for her. She she would can and preserve things and work in a garden and do those, and she loved me beyond measure, too much so. She had a terrible relationship with my father, usually over me, because she was extremely protective, but she was a good person in every respect. Picture of my beloved mother and my father in their good days. I think they were on their way, I can't remember where they were going. My father never looked so good as he does at his birthday party. As I'm looking at this picture, it's not my birthday party, it's my brother's birthday party. Because I'm relating to the picture above it, which is identified. This is a picture of Saran and I on our wedding day. And it was some wedding. We were married in a beautiful synagogue in Oakland, California. She was lovely. She is. This is a picture of Saran holding Andy. Standing next to them is Nan in pigtails, and behind it is me in my heavier days. Certainly not that heavy anymore. Without grandchildren at this time. To the left is Dan Horton, who's married to my daughter Nan. Standing next to him is my daughter Nan, and next to Nan is a picture of me. Next to me is a picture of Saran, and above Saran is my daughter Andy, and next to Andy is my son-in-law Bradley Kuiper. They don't, any of them look like this. This is a picture of my brother Gary and myself. Gary obviously is in the white sweater and I'm in the dark sweater. Going from left to right, we're all together at Legoland, although I'm not in this picture. Maybe I'm even taking the picture, I'm not sure. On the extreme left is my daughter Nan holding Nicole, sitting on the shoulders of Dan Horton, who is next to his daughter Ashley. In the middle is Saran, and next to Saran is my son-in-law Bradley holding his son Zachary, and next to Bradley is my daughter Andy holding my granddaughter Tara, who isn't looking at the camera, which is the usual case.